Should I? Good morning, everyone. Today I am here to present my long question. This is a clinical implication. Neurobiology of OCD you will encounter in your post graduation somewhere down the line. It is always a better thing that you can learn it from there, go back and then read it today so that you can you can concretize the concepts and this will help you out. So Dr. Sarthak, you can start.
OCD is a common chronic disabling disorder in which the patient suffers from unwanted and distressing thoughts, which results in repetitive behaviors called compulsion. But the cardinal feature of OCD is patients retain the insight to a variable degree into the irrationality and excessiveness of their obsessive compulsive behaviors. So, why is it necessary to understand the neurobiology of OCD? We have only two established first-line treatments. One is the exposure and response prevention therapy, and the other one is the serotonin reuptake inhibitor medications. So, very subset of patients fail to respond to either of these modalities, and very few experience complete remission. Antipsychotic augmentation is the only medication approach for OCD with substantial empirical support. So our incomplete understanding of the neurobiology of OCD has hampered efforts to develop new treatments or enhance extent intervention. Therefore, it is necessary to understand the neurobiology of OCD. OCD is familiar and heritable. There were twin and family aggregation studies. There was one study which included 5,409 twin pairs with high concordance rates in monozygotic versus dizygotic twins, resulting in an OCD heritability estimate of 48%. Population-based studies have also confirmed substantial heritability in OCD. Risk for OCD among relatives increase according to the degree of genetic relatedness to the provider. Environmental factors possess no additional risk factors for OCD. Metax calls et al. Estimated the genetic contribution of OCD as approximately to be 50%. Genetic studies, numerous candidate genes associated with the certain neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, glutamate containing pathways, of which one is SLC1A1, which encodes for the neuronal glutamate transporter. This is the main gene involved, and other genes are SAPAP3 and SNITRK5 gene. Two genome-wide association studies have been conducted on 1,400 cases. Neither study identified single nucleotide polymorphism associated with OCD at genome-wide significance level. A substantial portion of the genetic contribution to OCD is still unknown. Neurocircuitry of OCD. Dysfunction. In OCD, there is dysfunction not within a single region in the brain, but rather within the networks of brain regions. Dysfunction in OCD is based mainly on the motif of CSTC, that is corticostriato-thalamocortical loops, also known as OCD loop, and the related regions. So this is a schematic model of CSTC loop in which projection from the specific region of the frontal cortex projects to the striatum, and through the basal ganglia, the projections goes to the thalamus and return back to the cortex. This is the OCD loop. In green, it is highlighted the direct pathway, and with red, indirect pathways highlighted. So in the direct pathway, projections come from the cortex to the striatum, and then this box represents an inhibitory stimulus, while the arrow represents the excitatory stimulus. So from cortex, it goes to striatum and directly to the globus pallidus interna and then to the thalamus. So striatum is the main input of the basal ganglia. It is the largest structure of the basal ganglia and it is the main input. On the other hand, main output is the globus pallidus interna. In the red, it depicts indirect pathway, which goes from cortex striatum and an extra nodal from the globus pallidus externa to subthalamic nucleus. This extra step leads to an inhibitory tone to the cortex. So, in pathophysiology of OCD, it has been hypothesized that an imbalance between this direct and indirect pathway leads to the pathophysiology of OCD, and mainly the hyperactivity of the excitatory pathway. So we can infer that hyperactivity of the cortex, this circuit leads to the OCD pathophysiology. Over the years, several models have been proposed and revised implicating specific corticostriatothalamic circuits in the OCD pathology. One more model stresses that the orbitofrontal cortex, grounded in the extensive research implicating its role in OCD, this is the orbitofrontal striatal model. In this model, the existence of a lateral orbitofrontal loop was proposed, involving projections from the orbitofrontal cortex to the head of the caudate nucleus and the ventral striatum to the mediodorsal thalamus via the internal pallidus and finally returning to the thalamus or orbitofrontal cortex. This is the orbitofrontal striatal model, which was proposed apart from the OCD loop model. This diagram depicts other related CSTC circuits involved in the OCD. Uh, one is the dorsal cognitive circuit, and it is pertinent to executive functions, including working memory, projecting to the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and to the caudate nucleus. Another one is the ventral cognitive circuit, which is responsible for motor and response inhibition, starting from the anterolateral orbital frontal cortex, going to the putamen, thalamus, and back to the original cortical region. Another one is the sensory motor CSTC circuit, which projects from the premotor cortical region to the putamen and then the thalamus and back to the cortex. So these circuitries have also been responsible in the involvement of in the pathophysiology of the OCD. This is a multi-dimensional model of OCD. Different obsessive compulsive symptom dimension may be mediated by relatively distinct component of neural circuits. Aberration of the basal ganglia system may be attributed to difficulty in inhibition of unwanted impulses such as urges to check, while neural components of the limbic system are likely to be processed by emotional dimensions such as disgust for uncleanliness. Thus, seems uncleanliness. OCD thus seems best conceptualized as a spectrum of multiple overlapping syndromes rather than a unitary disease entity. So, a limbic system, which is responsible for the emotions, is also involved. On structural imaging studies, it has been seen that there has been change in volume of regions involved in the OCD, that is orbitofrontal cortex, anterior cingulate cortex, thalamus, and caudate nucleus, which we have studied in the previous slides. This supports the OCD loop model. On PET and functional MRI, there have been increased activations of these circuits, which was seen that it became normalized after the successful treatment, whether it was with the help of the medication or deep brain stimulation or neurosurgical lesions or TMS. FARS disease. This is a primary basal ganglia calcification. This image shows bilateral basal ganglia calcification. This was a case report in which a 44-year-old Hindu male postgraduate working as a teacher residing in a suburban area with anancastic traits and nil contributory family history presented 4 years back in 2019 with complaints of repetitive irrational intrusive thoughts and doubts about contamination, persistent repeated washing, and low mood since 37 years of age. Reason was for consultation was an increase in symptoms and dysfunction. On MSc, patient had an anxious effect, obsessive doubts, compulsive acts, and grade 4 insight. Physical examination was within the normal limit, but on and the patient was initiated on psychotherapy, 12 sessions of ERP and pharmacotherapy, fluoxetine, titrated to 80 mg. Subsequently, patient's OC symptoms first, the patient improved, but subsequently, the patient's OC symptoms recurred after 2 years. The patient also complained of insidious onset of heaviness of head and limb paresthesia. Subsequent limb stiffness and walking difficulty added to the distress. During this visit, he also reported difficulty in performing day-to-day activities such as buttoning and unbuttoning for a few days. On physical examination, patient had an increased fluid, and on CT, brain revealed the calcification in the bilateral ganglia, which you can see in this image. So this was the first case in which OCD appeared more than half a decade before the onset of the neurological symptoms. Serotonin hypothesis and efficacy of SRIs. SRIs have a broad spectrum of action in psychiatric conditions like depression and anxiety disorder. Efficacy in OCD is not a distinguished feature. SRI effective in OCD, other antidepressants are generally ineffective. So we can hypothesize that SRIs also contribute to the neurobiology of the OCD. PET studies with radioligands that bind to 5-HT transporter or 5-HT2A receptors. A study was conducted but did not reveal consistent group difference. So direct evidence for serotonergic abnormalities in OCD remains elusive. Serotonergic neurons originating in the midbrain, then to the orbitofrontal cortex and ventral striatum. So SRIs, action of SRIs in the neurobiology of OCD. SRIs in OCD may involve dampening of activity in hyperactive orbitofrontal subcortical circuits, which we have studied earlier, leading to the which restores the balance between OCD patient had enhanced dopamine transporter binding ratios in the right basal ganglia related to the healthy volunteers. Cortical dopamine may play a different role in OCD. So COMT inhibitor tolcapone significantly improved OCD symptoms in a 2-week double-blind placebo-controlled study. Antipsychotic drugs that block subcortical dopamine receptor as an adjunct to the SSRIs may target the habit system and compulsive behaviors. It is thus plausible that these drugs counteract irrational obsessions or magical ideations in the OCD. Role of glutamate. Glutamate is a primary excitatory neurotransmitter in brain. Glutamatergic projections along with the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA participate in connections forming the CSTC circuit. So it is implicated in the pathophysiology of OCD. Imaging research has shown that OCD patients had raised glutamate concentration in the caudate related to the healthy individual. Few drugs have been tried, like memantine, in a series of open label studies showed benefit of injective memantine in patients with OCD, but validity of these findings has been questioned. Another is the N-acetylcysteine. It increases cellular production of the antioxidant glutathione. A placebo-controlled RCT of adjunctive NAC 3000 mg on a daily basis was conducted. 40 adults with treatment-resistant OCD were included in the studies, but no significant differences were found between the groups. Glycine, which is a non-essential amino acid, there was another study, double-blind placebo-controlled trial, but due to the high dropout rate because of the high gastrointestinal side effects from the glycine, uh, uh, it was concluded that it has not a major role. Targets for treatment in OCD. This is a diagram depicting the circuits which we have studied in the previous slide. So RTMS act on the sensory motor CSTC circuit, and cognitive therapy, RTMS PDCS acts on the dorsal cognitive circuit, and DBS acts on the ventral motivational circuit. On the other hand, ERPs and SRI on the frontal limbic circuit, which helps in fear extinction. Uh, this was a study which was conducted by our department. Efficacy of intensive orbitofrontal continuous theta burst stimulation in OCD, a randomized control placebo study, and the results were intensive OFC in OCD is well tolerated with clinically significant improvements in anxiety symptoms and global severity. Take home message. Understanding the neurobiology of OCD is critical to the development of more effective treatment. Multiple studies support significant genetic contribution to the OCD, but pinpointing the specific genetic determinants requires additional investigation. SRIs are preferentially effective in OCD in one of the distinguishing features of this disorder. However, direct support for a role of serotonin in the pathophysiology of OCD is lacking. Several lines of preclinical and clinical evidence suggest dysfunction of the glutamatergic system in OCD, prompting tests of several promising glutamate modulating agents. And in functional imaging studies, shows consistent evidence for increased activity in the brain regions that form a CSTC loop. Neuromodulation treatment with either non-invasive devices or invasive devices like DBS provide further support for the CSTC model of OCD. A common substrate for various interventions may be modulation of CSTC circuit that mediates the symptoms of OCD. These are my references.
Any questions, comments, clarifications, doubts? Can ask.
I have mentioned in this slide that projection from serotonergic neurons goes to orbitofrontal cortex and ventral striatum. So SRIs, in various studies, it has been seen that SRIs improves the symptoms of OCD, whether while other antidepressants do not play a major role. So it has been hypothesized that it leads to the dampening of the activity in hyperactive OFC circuits and restoring balance between direct and indirect frontal cortical pathways. Serotonergic neurons, which originate in the midbrain, projects to the orbitofrontal cortex, which is involved in the neurocircuitry, as I have mentioned.
Okay. Okay.
जो जो वो बता रहे सर्किट उसमें कहाँ पे
Sir, serotonergic neuron projects to the orbitofrontal and ventral striatum. And sir, in CSTC, sir, striatum as well as OFC is involved.
So basically इस लूप में नहीं है, इस एक्स्ट्रा जो इस लूप के जो बाहर है, इसलिए एक्स्ट्रा टेरिटोरियल कंट्रोल को मॉड्यूलेट कर रहे हैं सेरोटोनिन को, इसीलिए वो नहीं है.
Balance. Then it restores the balance between the direct
But
and
these
indirect.
are all largely hypotheses.
Hypothesis.
Only way they have reached this conclusion is that serotonergic agents or SSRIs has resulted in improvement in patients.
Substantial.
And that is why many patients do not respond. Yes, sir. Also, they call them refractory OCD. This is very important. Very, very important. Diagrams, direct pathway, which is an excitatory pathway, indirect pathway, which is an inhibitory pathway, and now the third pathway is hyperdirect pathway, which is also an excitatory pathway. This is important. So there is a balance going around. When this balance is disrupted, then OCD will happen. Only case report diagram should allow we reported this fast disease because clear-cut fast disease means calcification in basal ganglia. And this patient was very interesting. He came to us with OCD, maybe 10 years before, and he was getting treatment for that. And subsequently, he started reporting paresthesias in the nerves. And then subsequently, he developed Parkinson's, with which we thought that initially it was some SSRI-induced Parkinson's or something. We did this liver imaging. We got this calcification. The idea behind this, this CSTC circuits are very important. These are small world, the small world loops concept has come up. And then this was subsequently published. And I don't know where he is. He's not in now. Maybe he's going to neurologist now. So that is the role of this circuit is establishing city. That is what the whole point of giving this case report. OFC में जो हमने दिया आपको this, but again it is one part of the whole wheel. So that is why many patients responded, many didn't respond. Ultimately, we didn't find much of because OFC or cortical input has only one role. There are a lot of other areas which are involved. That is why I think multidimensional model that is a very important model because see, most of the brain areas are involved. The striatum is involved, prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, and limbic system. So, barring your other cortices, your temporoparietal and occipital cortex, and some areas of the thalamus, hypothalamus also. So, most of the brain areas are involved. Posterior part of the brain setup. So, OCD, that is why targeting in single area might not help us. He worsened. We have been trying a level best. So whatever resources are there, in order to tease out in research, in thesis protocol, as sir is discussing, one refractory OCD patient came, we admitted him, gave him a lot of ketamine with ECT. He never turned up after that. It was also a failure kind of. So OCD remains frustrating construct because there is a lot of heterogeneity. Maybe we have to segregate in kind of an OCD and same presentation of OCD and then target those patients. There are huge presentations, different presentations in OCD patient, maybe involving different areas.
It's a spectrum. Using spectrum.
Yeah,
A lot of hypochondriasis.
CSTC circuits वाले भी जाना, direct hyperdirect वाले आपको. Can you just, with the help of pointers, show what is CSTC circuit?
The CSP says cortico-striato-thalamocortical circuit. It projects from the specific regions of the cortex to the striatum.
So the whole is striatum, and then you come to the thalamus.
Then to the basal ganglia and thalamus, and then back to the cortex.
So cortico-striato-thalamocortical circuits.
This is the direct pathway, this is indirect pathway, this is hyperdirect pathway. In indirect pathway, it projects directly from the striatum to the globus pallidus interna and then to the thalamus, and it inhibits the thalamus. And on the other hand, in indirect pathway, it goes to the subthalamic nucleus, and then to
the subthalamic nucleus, then interna, and then thalamus. So what is happening? There is a loop between internal and external. That is an indirect pathway. So that is inhibitory pathway. Now the direct pathway का excitation हो जाएगा. So there will be excessive motor loops, excessive activation. So Fourier kind of presentation. So the cognitive parallel है OCD. So obsessions will come out. See what are the various biochemicals involved in the each pathway. GABA है, glutamate है. ये दिखाई नहीं. जहाँ इनहिबिटरी है, वहाँ GABA होगा, जहाँ एक्साइटेड